Kakalosh Boker Tov, Masechet Bava Metzia Daf 22a1. We are talking about now, we're trying to bring a proof to Rava. If you remember, we were speaking about that there's going to be a machlok between Rava and Abaye to do with Yush Shalom Midat, which means that for sure he would have been Miyaesh, he would have done Yush, he would have given up hope, but he just doesn't know about it. So do you consider that it's considered Yush or not? So we're bringing proofs back and forth. We're going to now try to bring a proof to Rava. Tashema, we learned in a Braita. Haganav shenatal mizeh v'natal lezeh. V'chen gazlan shenatal mizeh v'natal lezeh. So you have a ganav that he took from one person and he gave it to somebody else. Or a gazlan. Remember, ganav is hiding. Gazlan is in front of their face. Right? And now we're on the top of Kav Bet Amud Aleph, 22a1. V'chen yarden. Or if you have the river of the Yarden in Eretz Yisrael, she'ala, that it came up, right? Which means that it overflowed. V'natal mizeh v'natal lezeh. It took the water, it took property from one place and it put it somewhere else. Mashe natal, natal. Whatever the ganav or the gazlan or the nahar took, it took. Umashe natal, natal. Whatever it took, and whatever it gave, it gave. So again, here, it could be that the Baalim didn't even know about it because they were in Honolulu on vacation. All of a sudden, the ganav came and he took it and he gave it to somebody else, or the gazlan, or the nahar, and it's considered that it's good. Now, why? Yush Shalom Midat is not koneh according to Abaye. So this is good according to Rava. So Bishlema Gazlan Yarden. I understand the Gazlan and the Yarden. The Kachazi Lehu Miyayesh, because the person sees it. Meaning a Gazlan was in front of his face. So therefore it does make sense that he saw it and he actually gave up hope. Right? Or for example the Yarden, you see that the water's overriding and overflowing and everything. Ella Ganav, but the Ganav Mika Chazele de Miyayesh. Do you see? And therefore you're going to remember the ganav is behind your back. So how do you even know what's going on? The other two you could explain that yes, he knew about it, but this one you can't say that he knew about it. So answers the Gemara, Tir Gemara of Papa. Rav Papa's talking about, right, what type of ganav we're talking about? Belistim mezuyan, right? That he took it against his will. That means the geneva was not a geneva behind your back, but it was a geneva of listim mezuyan, okay, which means armed robbery. That's what they call it. Okay, and now why did they call it ganav? Because ki'ilu, right? They go like ganavim, and it's not like a gazlan that takes a bekoach of galui. Meaning like this: a gazlan, he's in your face, so he's going to take it. Yeah, but you know exactly who's stealing, and you know everything that's going on. A ganav is behind your back, but usually behind your back means that you don't even know that he came. Here, you do know that he came, right? But you just don't know who he is. He's doing it like a ganav, but he's an armed robbery. So it's armed, meaning that he's here, but he still's got the mask. He's still got, so it's not like the gazlan which is in front of everybody, right? The gazlan is in front of everybody. Everybody knows who it is. Here it's a ganav, but it's listim mizuyan. Okay, so says the Gemara, if so, I know gazlan, selam shos. They're both gazlanim then. What's the difference between a gazlan that's doing it bekoach, right, or the gazlan which is doing it also like this, which is armed robbery? And so the Gemara, you're right, there are two different types of gazlanim, just like we mentioned before. One of them is the gazlan, which is mamash in front of your face, that everybody knows who he is, meaning he's not hiding anything. The other one is hiding, but he's armed, right? But sometimes ganavim, they're not armed. They just come behind the back, they steal and they go, but there's nobody that needs to be armed, okay? Tashema, we're trying to bring another proof now from a Braita. Shataf nahar korav etzav va'avanav untano b'toch sedeh chavero. Imagine right now the nahar comes, and it washed away your beams, your wood, your stones, and it put it in the field of somebody else. So it belongs now to the Bala Sadeh. Why? Because there's yush of the Baalim. So says the Gemara, Ta'ama, the reasoning is the Nityashua Baalim. Hastamalo. So one second. This is now going to be a raya to Abaye, because it's only because there was yush. Mashma, that if there was no yush, it doesn't belong to the other person. So answers the Gemara, what are we dealing with? Which means you could have saved it because you have a siman, and therefore since you could save it with a siman, he shouldn't have done yush. So the fact that he did do yush, that's actually going to be good enough that it's actually considered a yush, and therefore he doesn't get it. If so, let's see the seifa of that Braita. The seifa says, let's say they're running after it. So imagine the water's taking their wood, stones, beams, and everything, and the guy's running after it, trying to get it. So chayav lachzir, he's obligated to give it back. Yeah? If we're talking about that he could save it, So my idea miradfin. What does it mean miradfin? Afilu kishem miradfin nami. Even if you're not running after it, meaning the Braita said that only if they were running after it, you have to give it back. Even if they're not running after it, they would have to give it back. So answers the Gemara, what are we dealing with? They could save it, but very pressing, meaning it's not 100% they could save it. It's like, bekoshi they could save it. Right? So if minatfin, if they're running after it, so obviously there was no yush, and that's why they're running after it. And minatfin, but if they're not running after it, yusha miyash, you are going to be miyash, because that's already a siman that anyway, it wasn't 100% that you could save it. It was only you could save it al-lideh dachak, which means like, maybe you could save it. It's a maybe, impressing need. So therefore, the siman is the redifa. If you're running after it, it's a siman that you didn't have yush. If you're not running after it, it's a siman that you did do yush. Tashema, another braita. Ketzad, right? In the case where Ketzad amru, hatorem shelo midat trumato truma. If I come to your fruits, and I took off truma. So he said, even if it was without dat, meaning without your knowledge that I'm taking off the truma for you, it's going to be considered truma. If right now you come and you take the fruits, right, for the bala sadeh, and you took off the truma without the reshut, im choshesh mishum gezel. If right now the bala sadeh is going to be makpid because of gezel, and trumato truma, it's not going to be a truma, vim lav, trumato truma. So basically the question is going to be, what's the case exactly? Right? What is our case? Right? That we're going to say that it's going to be considered a truma or not a truma. Right? If
it doesn't belong to him.
That's what we're saying. That means we're saying, if there's no problem with gezel, right? Im choshesh mishum gezel, it's not going to be a good truma. But if he doesn't have, if he's not makpid that it's being done without his reshut, it is going to be a good truma. Right? So the Gemara is going to say, uminayin im hu yodea im choshesh mishum gezel vim lav. How do you know if he's choshesh because of gezel or not? Meaning, how do you know that this guy is bemet suspecting for gezel or not? This guy is the bala sadeh. How do you know? If the balabait comes and he sees him and he tells him, go to the nicer fruits, if they find nicer ones, trumato truma. So therefore it's a good truma. If not, and trumato truma, it's not a good truma, right? Because then he was saying it sarcastically. Liktua be'alim ve'osifu. What happens with the ba'alim? They added on to it benkach ubenkach trumato truma. So then it is going to be a good truma. So again, one more time, we're trying to find out, this guy is taking off the truma for the balabait. Usually it always has to be done midat. Here we just gave you the yesod that if it was done, that you're like considered a gazlan or a ganav, it's not a good truma. But if you're not going to be considered, so then it is a good truma. Now we ask, how do you know? She says it all depends. If right now the balabait comes and he sees you, and he says, why don't you take the nicer ones? Now you check. If you check and there are nicer ones, so it's a good truma. Meaning he wasn't saying it sarcastically. He really meant go to the nicer ones and take the truma from the nicer ones. If you don't find any nicer ones, it means he was being sarcastic. What the guy's coming and tell you, why don't you go to the nice ones and take all? So obviously it's not a good truma. Then he comes and he says, what about also if he adds on to it? So for example, right, I came to the guy's field, I started taking. So I started taking, let's say 5. And the balabait comes and he adds the 6th one. He adds on to that which I took. So when he comes and he adds on, it is going to be a good truma, because it shows that he was happy, right? That he acknowledges and he was happy with what I did. One second. So yafot mehen trumato truma amai. Now 1 second. When we said about the first braita, the first part of the braita was that if you did find nicer ones, it is going to be a good truma. Why? Be'inna de taram halwa v'yeda. Right now, he's happy with it, which means right now he acknowledges it and he's happy with it. But at the time that it was taken, he had no knowledge. So therefore, what do I care that afterwards, after the fact, he comes and he says, by the way, go get nicer ones. At the time, right, if you're going to tell me right now, right, that you shelomidat is not koneh, so what's going on? Here there was no yush, there was nothing. So Tirgima Rava liba da Abaye, so Rava comes and he answers it according to Abaye, the shavye shliach, which means, right, the bala perot made the shaliach to separate the truma, and therefore we cannot compare this to the case of yush shelomidat. So that means our case was not about stam, we're talking about a shaliach. Now he explains, because it's actually logical, that he says, if you're going to tell me that he didn't make a shliach, does it make sense to say that it's a truma? It says in the pasuk, atem gam atem, which means ken tarimu at gam atem trumat Hashem. When it says ken tarimu atem, but it says gam atem, what does that mean? Lerabot shluchachem, that your shaliach can also take off truma for you. Ma atem ledatchem, but just like atem, when you're taking off truma, it has to be ledatchem. Av shluchachem ledatchem, meaning it has to be with dat. And if it's not going to be with dat, it's nothing. So therefore, obviously here in this case, we must be talking about a shaliach. We cannot be talking about without a shaliach. Therefore, it's not a question against Abai. We thought it was a question against Abai because we were just talking about stam, a guy went into your property and started taking off truma. That for sure is not the case. It has to be that we're talking about a case of a shaliach. Okay? So that's what you have to actually be saying. Okay? So the Gemara says, okay, so the Elach, Ma'askina going the other Shav the Shliach, so you made a Shliach and you went and you told him, Zil Trom. Yeah, what does it mean Zil Trom? Go take it. Yeah, Velo Amar, and he didn't tell him, Trom Mehani, take from these ones. Ustame, the Balabait, Kiterum. So the stam of the Balabait is that when you're going to be Toreh, mi Benoni hu Tarum. You're going to take the Benoni. So he went and he took it from the nicer ones. So comes the balabait and he finds what he says, go to the nicer ones. So if you do find the nicer ones, so it's a good truma, but if not, it's not a good truma. You understood? Meaning this is all the same flow. One more time, right? We could stop right by the next Tashema, which is coming up now, which is the next proof. One more time. We had a proof, right? We were trying to bring a proof against Abai. Abai is the one that says Shalom is not koneh, which means that if the owners did not know what's going on, klum, shum davar. What was it? I'm going to come to your field and I'm going to take off truma and it's going to be considered a truma. Says the Gemara, right? 1 second. He says it is going to be a good truma only if he's happy about it. What does that mean he's happy about it? He's going to come and he's going to tell you, by the way, why don't you go to the nicer ones? So we said if he says go to the nicer ones and there are nicer ones, which means that he meant it. So therefore, it's going to be a good truma. If there's no nicer ones, it means that he didn't mean it. So if it's not going to be a good truma, but obviously he was saying that sarcastically. And then we said that if you actually add on to it, that it's going to be a good truma. Says the Gemara, what's the case? If you're talking about Shalom is not koneh, how does this work? So the Gemara answers, you're right. Obviously, this Braita is not talking about without anything. It has to be talking about a shaliach. And just like the Gemara says, the pasuk says gamatem, which means atem. Just like when you're going to take off truma, it has to be ledatachem. So to gamatem, the shaliach, which is the gam, is coming lerabot shaliach, that he could also take off truma, has to be ledatachem, just like yatem. It has to be also with your dad. So therefore the Gemara says, okay, fine, but then what's the braita then? So the braita is like this. Usually when the balabait comes and he tells the shaliach, take off trumot u'masrot, it means benoni. A person usually means normal. What is normal? Normal means normal things that you're going to take off. Now this guy came, the shaliach, and he took off nicer ones. So now that he took off nicer ones, it depends upon the reaction of the balabait. If the balabait sees him and he tells him, go take nicer ones, and there are nicer ones, he actually didn't mean it. And therefore, it's going to be a good truma. But if he said go to the nicer ones and there's not nicer ones, so obviously he didn't mean it, and therefore it's not going to be a good truma. Okay? So he comes and he says this, Ameiman Morzutra Ravashi Iklau Lebustana. So Ameiman Morzutra and Ravashi, they came and they were found by the Pardes, by the orchard of Mari Bar Isak. Aiti Arise Tamre V'Rimunes. So the Aris, the sharecropper, he brought Tmarim V'Rimunim, dates and pomegranates. Ushta Kamayhu. So he placed it in front of them. Ameiman Ravashi Achle. So Ameiman and Ravashi, they ate from the fruits. And Morzutra, right, Lo Achil. Right, they did not eat from the fruits. Okay? Because they thought that was maybe Gezel, that maybe the sharecropper took it without permission. Mari Bar Isak. So Mari Bar Isak, which was the owner of the field, came. Ashkechinu, and he found them. So he told the Aris, why didn't you bring the better ones for the rabbis? Meaning the rabbis are already coming to my house. You have to give them la creme de la creme. Well, you're giving them, like Benoni, the second class, citizens. What's going on here? Give them the best. So Amru later, Amemar of Ravashi Morzutra. So Amemar and Ravashi went and told Morzutra, Hashta Mailo Achim. So why didn't you eat then? So Vatanya, we learned in the right. Suya fot men Truma to Truma. It's a good Truma. So just like if you tell your Shaliach that even though he took off good ones, you tell your Shaliach, why don't you get better ones? And it's going to be considered good. And therefore it's a good Truma. So to the same thing here. The fact that the owner of the house, Mari Bar, what was his name? Mari Bar Isaac, right? Mari Bar Isaac, yeah, Isaac, yeah. So Mari Bar Isaac, he comes and he said, go get them better ones. That's a proof that what? That they should get it. Amalehu, he told them, Hachi Amar Rava, this is what Rava says, Lo amru klachetz liyafot el inyan truma bivad. It's only by truma. Mishum de mitzvah hu, because it's a mitzvah, venichale, and it's good for him to do a mitzvah. Aval hacha, but here, mishum kesifuta hu da amarachi. He's only doing it because he's embarrassed. Meaning, exactly, what does that mean? When we said the entire concept that go to the nicer ones, he's trying to do a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah, trumot u'masrot. Since it's a mitzvah, trumot u'masrot, so therefore he wants the best. And therefore it's good for him. He wants that there should be a mitzvah being done. Meaning you're giving it anyway. So you may as well give the best. Right? The chelev, right? We're talking about the best of the bread, the crop. But here, he says he's embarrassed. The guy already came, he served you. Now you come, now what? He's going to start saying, he's embarrassed. He says, he's saying a ki'ilu, ya'anu. Yeah, as they say. Okay, so says the Gemara, Tashima. Right, we're going to try to bring another proof now. So that's what's actually mashma over there. I don't know exactly how old is halacha, because again, it's just a machloka between the two different rabbis, and it's actually very interesting. The guy comes and he brings you fruits. What is the real kavanah? I don't know. Okay. Tashima, we're going to try to bring another proof now. Okay. This is talking about Hechal l'kabel tuma. It says over here like this, Odehu hatal alehen v'samach. If there's tal on the fruits, and he's happy about it. Hare ze bechiyutan. So this is going to be the pasuk of bechiyutan ma'im al zera. Remember that in order for a fruit, in order to become accessible for tumah, it has to have one of the 7 liquids. Yad shachatam, yain, dam, right? We're talking about sheleg, right? We're talking about chalav, dvash, right? All these different things, shemen, oil, right? All these things, right? It has to be on the fruit in order to become susceptible for tumah. Right? So one of them is tal, right? Shachat. The tet of shachat is tal. So dew, right? So if the dew is still on the fruit, and he's happy about it, he's happy that it's moist because of the tal. So therefore it's v'chiyutan. When it says v'chiyutan ma'im zera, right? So therefore it's going to become tameh, right? So that means it becomes susceptible for tumah. So therefore he says nigvu, if they were already wiped from the tal, Afal pisha samach, even though he was happy when the tal came down on them, right? Enan bechiyutan. You don't have the chiyutan. Tamamai, why not? Right? Kavbet amubet, 22b. Why isn't it not anymore bechiyutan? So he says, Lav mishum de lo amrin, is not because we don't say, Kevin de gelai minta de hashta nichale, miikara nami nichale. Are you not going to say that at the end of the day, now that it's iglai minta, now that it's revealed, that now he's happy? So it's mashma at the beginning he wasn't happy. Meaning only now that it's dry, meaning now that it's wiped, now he's happy. Mashma that at the beginning he wasn't happy. So therefore, because of that, right? That's why we're going to say that it was. So if it's iglai milta, then now he's going to be happy. So therefore, from the beginning he was happy. So therefore, since we don't say that, so that's like Abaye. That Abaye says yush of the baalim, right, is not considered a yush lemafreya. So therefore, basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to compare that just like retroactively, right? Like after the fact and retroactively, so too after the fact and retroactively. Remember, whether according to Abaye and Rava, here there was a yush, right? When you find out about it, there is going to be a yush. The only question is going to be not about, right, the yush. The question is going to be whether it's because it's shalomidat. Meaning, according to everybody, whether according to Abaye and Rava, there was a yush. But the problem though is that you don't know about it at the beginning. So since you don't know about it at the beginning, that's why this is what's happening.
What is Marcus here? Why is he happy or not?
That answers, do not compare the entire concept of the yushalomidat to the lemafreya of the happiness by the v'chiyutan. Shanehatam, it's different by the fruits. Tichtiv, as it's written, hiten. Meaning, even though we read it v'chiyutan, it's written yiten, meaning if it was yutan, you could also add a vav after the yod. It doesn't, we read it yutan, but really by meant it's written yiten, because there's no vav. So it's yod, taf, nun sofit. So that means it's written yiten, but we read it, it's written one way, but we read it yutan. So therefore what we're trying to say is that when we're going to say yiten, it comes out that the fruits are not going to be mukhshar lekabel tumah, Ad she'iten mayim be'atzmo, which means he has to do it himself, and not the fact that he's going to be happy after they came and they dried the fruits. So says the Gemara, if so, Reisha Nami, this Reisha is also going to be the same thing. So says the Gemara, what does that mean? Also in the Chelek Rishon of the Braita, when he was going to be happy with a tal on it, so therefore it shouldn't be Mukshal Lekabel Tumah, because he didn't put it there. So answers the Gemara, Hatam K'der Rav Papa, it's like Rav Papa. The Rav Papa Rami, because Rav Papa has a contradiction. Ketiv, it's written Ki Ten, but we read it Ki Yutan. Ha-Ketzad, what's the case? Ba'inam Ki Yutan, Dumin de Ki Yiten. We need Ki Yutan, just like Ki Yiten. Ma Yiten Ledat, just like Yiten has to be Ledat Ba'alim, which means it has to be with the Ratzon and the Kavanah. So too, the same thing, Ki Yutan, Nami Ledat. It has to be also Ledat, which means that it's not going to be Machshir the Perot unless it's going to be Ledat Ba'alim. And therefore, if it's going to be that there's going to be the Dat Ba'alim, then it's going to be with it, or if it's not going to be with it. Kal Kadosh. Boker Or, we're continuing with Kavbet Amud Bet 22b, Tashema de Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So, usually somebody would just tell you it's like 40 lines up from the bottom. Right, but we're going to do 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines down. Okay, from the top. Tashema. It's in the middle of the page. Right under the Aleph. There's a little Aleph right under that. Tashema. Tamar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Ishmael ben Yotzadak. Says Rabbi Yochanan named Rabbi Ishmael ben Yotzadak. Minayin la'aveda sheshitafa nahar. How do we know that if something was lost, right, through a shtifat nahar? Remember, shtifat nahar means the river just came and took it. How do we know that you're allowed to come and you're allowed to keep this object? Tichtiv, it says in the pasuk, v'chen ta'aseh lahamoro. This is what you're allowed to do to your hamor. V'chen ta'aseh lesimlato. That's you're allowed to do for the clothing. V'chen ta'aseh chol avadat rechicha. To anything which he lost, shtav menu tzatah. Mimenu is coming to teach you mi she'avuda hemenu. Now which is going to be lost from him, it's yatzel kol adam. It's going to be found by everybody. Yatzta zol, this comes to exclude shatfa nahar, which is going to be lost from him. Ve'ena mitzuyat zel kol adam, and it's not going to be found by everything else. The isura dumya de heter, and the isur is going to be domeh to the heter, which means now that the pasuk just told you about the aveda, which is going to be found by every single person, that you're obligated to give it back, and also the aveda, which is not found, right, which you're allowed to be zochenet. So therefore, we're going to say that an aveda is going to be asur. Ma heteira, just like the heter. Ben te'it siman, ben delepa siman, shara. Just like by the heter, meaning an aveda, whether, right, it's got a siman or it doesn't have siman, you're allowed to keep it because shatfa nahar. Remember, we said that the second that the river took it, even if it does have a siman, you gave up hope. Right? Why? Because the river took it to Honolulu. You don't know where it went. Yeah? So to isura, ben te'it siman, ben delepa siman isura. So to by Isur, whether it does have a siman or not, it's going to be Asur. So according to Abaye, this actually makes sense. Why? Because even a chefetz, which does not have a siman, you're not allowed to come and be mizakeh if it's going to be that it's going to be before the Ba'alim actually know about it. So it comes out, but according to Rava, all the entire concept of an avedah, something that's lost that does not have a siman, is going to be mutar, is even if it's going to be before Yush. So it comes out according to Shita, there's no isur if there's no basiman, and it's not compared to the heter. So this in essence is a tiyufta de Rava. This in essence is a question against Rava, and it's a tiyufta. Okay? V'hilcheta, and the halacha is, okay? V'hilcheta kavate da Abaye, v'yal kegam. The halacha is like Abaye and Ya'al kegam, which means usually the halacha is like Rava. But in Ya'al Kegam, the halacha is like Abaye. What is Ya'al? The Yod? Yush Shelo Midat. So we paskin like Abaye in Yush Shelo Midat. Okay. Amar le Ravacha bere de Rava le Ravashi. Says Ravacha, the son of Rava to Ravashi. V'chimiachar deitot of Rava. Right? Now that we have a question against Rava, Hani tamre de zika, these tmarim, right? That they come down with the wind. How do you eat it then? Yeah, you have tmarim. Yeah, so how do you eat it then? How are we going to start eating it? Right? Gracias. So the question is, how do we start eating it? So he comes and he says as follows. He says like this. He says, right? Why? Because if there was no yush and we paskin like Abaye, so therefore what's going on? How do we eat these tmarim? You have tmarim that they came down, right? They fell, and obviously there was no yush because they don't know about it. So if they fell from the tree, how do you eat it from the floor? So
Who
Elmaleh,
said that it was under the tree?
No, the
we
wind
know
took
the
them
tree.
the wind took it. The wind took it.
But we know whose the tree is.
1 second. So Elmaleh comes and he says, he says, no. He says, since when they fall, what happens is that there's a whole bunch of shkatzim and matzim that they come eating them. So if from lechatechila, even before they fall, you already have yush on the fruits which fall down.
I
Okay?
can make use on the jelly.
Says the Gemara, Yatzmel delav b'nei mechila nilhumai. What about Yitomim that they're lav b'nei mechila? Which means you have to remember Yitomim ktanim, they don't have da'at. So if they don't have da'at, what are you going to say for that? I understand that, for example, Mordechai already from the beginning, he already has in mind that maybe be'emet it's going to fall the dates and it's going to become disgusting because of the creepy crawlers. So therefore it makes sense. But what about Yitomim ktanim? Yitomim ktanim, what? They actually come and they're going to forgive. Elmaleh says, Baga be'ara diatmen lo machzekim. Abika, right, is not going to be the entire thing of the Yitomim is going to be prohibited because of the safek. But rather we go after the majority of the fields, which are of Gdolim. And therefore, since we go after the majority of the fields, which is going to be Gdolim, so therefore we're not going to have this problem. Which means that right now, if you're going to find a date, you're going to go after the Rov. The majority are not Yitomim Ktanim that they own all the properties. And therefore, if you go after the majority, it's going to be okay. Right? That there's going to be Yush. So says the Gemara, Muchsak ve'omed mai. What about now if the Karka is already in the hands of the Yitomim? So Kerachta mai. Or if the Tmarim that they already fell down are already, it's within a Geder of Avanim. Which means that there's not going to be Shkatzim Masim that they could get there. Elmaleh says you're right. In such a case, asiran, it's going to be prohibited. Okay? Fine. Now let's continue. You remember we were speaking about in the Mishnah to do with krichot and agudot. So krichot b'rshut rabim. We said that what happens right now if you're going to have these bundles of grains in the rshut rabim. So we say it belongs to you. Amar Rabba comes and he says, va'afilu b'davar sheyesh bo siman, even if something that it has a siman. Alma, so you see from here, Kasava Rabba comes and he says, Siman asui lidares lo have siman. Any siman which people are going to trample upon, and therefore it's not considered a siman. And therefore, since it's not considered a siman, right, that's it. He says over here, because you're not going to be somech that you could get the siman, but the siman is going to be trampled. And once the siman is going to be trampled, that's it, you had it. Rava comes and he says, Lo shano lebalvar she'em bo siman. It's only going to be if there's no siman. But if it does have a siman, chayav le'achriz, you're obligated to come and to mention it, to announce it. Alma kasav Rava. So you see from here the Rava holds siman asui lidares. Have a siman. Even a siman that they're going to be start trampling upon it, it is still considered a siman, meaning that it's not going to be. That means even though it's not going to be destroyed, right? There's still not going to be miyash, and therefore it's still going to be a siman in the fact that it's done in such a way. But some people they actually learn it in a different way. Siman asui lidares. Well, we are talking about a siman, which is going to be made for drusa. For drusa, what? Rabba comes and he says, "Lo avi siman." It's not considered a siman. The Rava says, "Avi siman." It is going to be a siman. So Tzran, we learned in a Mishnah, krichot b'rshut rabim arelu shelo. Yeah, when we're talking about now krichot and reshut rabim, it's going to belong to him. B'rshut yachid, not telu machriz. But if it is in the reshut yachid, in a private domain, you could take it and you have to announce it. So what's the case exactly? If you're talking about the lepeu siman that there's no siman, b'rshut yachid mi machriz. I don't say what are you mentioning it? If you found it in reshut yachid, what do you have to mention then? Yeah, elalav, but rather tibu siman. There is a siman. Uktani, and we learned b'rshut rabim arelu shelo. The reshut rabim belongs to him. Alma, so you see from here, siman asui lidares lavi siman. That if it's a siman which is made right for trampling, it's not considered siman. So tiyufta de Rava. Again, it's going to be a question against Rava. That Rava said that a siman which is going to be made to trample upon is still considered a siman. That's not correct. So says the Gemara, Amalecha Rava, no, Rava's going to answer you, no, that I'm still correct. Why? Leolam de lebeu siman. Really, be'emet, I don't have a siman. Now you ask, so 1 second. So what are you going to mention if it's in Reshut Yachid? He says, Machriz makom. You're not going to place the name of the Avedah, you're going to say where you found the Avedah. Meaning, if you're going to say, somebody that found an Avedah in this place, right, come to me. Now when the guy comes, right, he could tell you, Al Pi the Siman, where did you find it? Okay, and therefore that's what he's talking about. That means somebody placed it there. It wasn't just stam that he dropped it there. That means it was nikar, that it wasn't that it was just dropped, that somebody came and bechavana placed it there. So even though it's going to be in such a place, you're going to say, by the way, it's in this certain place. It's Rishut Yachid, but they obviously placed it there bechavana. Rabbi Amar, and Rabbi comes and he says, makom is not a siman. Te'it Marbuz was stated makom, right? Rabbi says it's not a siman, and Rabbi says that it is a siman. So now let's try to bring a proof whether according to Rabbi or Rava, right, is it a siman or not a siman? Let's try to understand. So Tashema krichot b'rishut rabim arelu shelo b'rishut yachid notelu machriz, right? When we have a concept of krichot, so if it's talking about b'rishut rabim, it belongs to you. B'rishut yachid notelu machriz ve'ulamot. Now when we're talking about big stocks, okay, whether it's b'rishut rabim or b'rishut yachid, you take it and you actually mention it, you announce it. So each one is going to come and answer it according to his shita. Rabba Metaretz Ta'ameh is talking about a siman. So since you have a siman, that's why he says in Rishut Arbim it doesn't help a siman because it's made for midras. Remember, once they trample upon it, it's not a siman anymore. So therefore, even though it had a siman, once it's a siman which is made to destroy, so that's it. And Rabba is going to be Metaretz Ta'ameh b'makom. We're talking about the place, and the place is going to be the siman. Rabba Metaretz Ta'ameh b'siman. Kricho b'Rishut Arbim, it belongs to him. Mishum Kav Gimel Amud Aleph on the top, the midarsa, right? Because it's a siman which is made to trample upon it. Therefore, it's not a siman. If it's going to be b'Rishut Yachid, you do mention it, you announce it. Why? Because they don't trample upon it. But alumot, when they're big stocks, right? Whether it's Rishut or b'Rishut Yachid, you announce it because since they're above, they're very, very tall, so people don't stamp upon it. Remember, if it's in Rishut Rabim, people just start running over it. If it's in a private property, people don't run over it; they go to the side. And Rava is going to be Metaretz Tameh because he says the makom, if it's going to be kricho b'Rishut Rabim, they belong to him. The minishtafta. What does that mean? The minashtafa. He says because they start rolling around, and therefore what happens is that it's not the same anymore. So it's not the same place. B'Rishut Yachid, you're obligated because they don't roll around, which means that it still stays in the same place. But if we're talking about big ones, whether Rishut or B'Rishut Yachid, you take it and you announce it because since they're heavy, so they don't start rolling around, right, with everything that we're talking about.